This week's guest is Michelle Hurn, a registered dietitian who almost died at the age of 12 from anorexia, but was just named the #1 6-hour performance female for 2020 by Ultra Runners magazine. What's really surprising is how she eats to perform at that level. So let's get into it. Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Hunger Hunt Feast. With me is registered dietitian Michelle Hurn. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. I like your story. I love where you're coming from. And I think it's very interesting what you're doing as an ultra runner and the way you eat. So I think I can't wait to unpack all of this. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you have quite a bit of a personal history with diet, some personal struggles. You weren't always like this super fit athlete that you are now. So if you don't mind, let's start with like a little bit of your backstory as in what brought you to where you are now.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, my story basically starts, I am born and raised right outside of Dallas, Texas. I'm the youngest of 4 girls. I have 3 older sisters. And when I was 12, I had a very serious eating disorder. I was diagnosed with anorexia. So at the age of 12, I was almost 5 feet tall and I was approximately 57 pounds. So
Wow.
For anybody who's science-minded, my BMI was 11.7. I ended up in inpatient treatment, in Wickenburg, Arizona, pretty far away from where I live. And I remember as a very young person, my parents asked me like, hey, I need you to stay here and wait. We have to go talk to the doctor. And like any good 12-year-old, I kind of like snuck out so I could hear I wanted to hear what they were saying. And I remember the doctor telling my parents that there wasn't a good chance I would survive. There's about a 10% chance. At that point, I was having heart arrhythmias, my kidneys were shutting down, my core body temperature was low. Like it didn't look good. And if I did survive, then, there could be permanent damage. And I shared this in my book that at that point, even at the age of 12, when I heard that, I wasn't scared and I wasn't like angry. I was actually relieved. I mean, anybody who's suffered with an eating disorder or severe depression or suicidal ideation, it took over my everything. It was in every thought, every action, everything I did revolved around restricting and exercising. And so that was incredibly difficult and scary and terrible. And
Wow.
my dog is coming in the picture.
He's great.
And so that was awful. I'm very fortunate, I'm really hard on healthcare and I'm incredibly hard on our acute healthcare system. But I do think for, life-saving things, like if you're in a major car accident or whatever, healthcare saved my life. Like I ended up, gaining weight and being able to come home. Mm. And so when I got into high school, I gained enough weight that I wanted to participate in sports. And I ended up trying out for the basketball team, was cut, and I wanted, they wanted to put me in PE, but the PE teacher said, well, there's this running thing you could do. And I never heard of a running thing. I knew of track, but I wasn't really familiar with cross country. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, I'll give it a go. And ended up just falling in love with it. I loved being able to, it was kind of a freeing and fun. I love the camaraderie of the team. And for me at that point too, I struggled certainly with, eating disorder tendencies throughout my adolescence, but I had to eat to run. So that was a really empowering thing. Okay. And then when I was a junior in high school, I ended up, I was running with a club coach and we talked about me getting a scholarship, oh my gosh, if you just get a little faster, you could get a scholarship. And so I ended up following a vegetarian diet because I heard that could make you faster, that could help you lose weight. And it was very successful. I lost weight. I wasn't eating, any meats. I was just eating a lot of vegetables and salads and low fat. Lost my period, wasn't menstruating during that time. And I ran great. I ran even faster, but unfortunately it all kind of came crashing down. My senior year of high school, I got a stress fracture in my pubis bone in my hip, lost all potential scholarship offers. And found out I had a DEXA scan that I had osteoporosis in my spine and osteopenia in my hips, which is a pretty scary diagnosis for somebody who's 18 years old.
17, 18 years old. Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, it was scary. And of course, during that time too, when I transitioned my diet, I started having a lot more muscle pain. I had a lot more anxiety. I ended up walking on to the University of Arkansas. I ran for them there. Had a great time. Was very successful. Started eating, normally eating meat and again. or, you know, more like the standard American diet.
Sure.
But I had a fracture my sophomore year of in college, which would pretty much end my collegiate running career. It was in my left iliac crest, just still left over from low bone density. And so, you know, I was a little bit lost after that. I still had a few years left to finish up school. And I knew nutrition was important. I knew it was powerful. I'd seen it kind of transfer me from being incredibly sick to being able to run. But I also, you know, wasn't sure what was gonna be next after that, for sure.
Wow. How did you, I gotta, if you don't mind, back up just a little bit. How did you, I mean, obviously you went to a care center when you were 12 to fatten you back up, essentially, to basically put some weight on you. There's probably a lot of IVs and liquid, nutrition, lots of just trying to put as many calories on you as possible. But it wasn't just a physical problem. There was a mental, emotional component to that got you there. So what helped you? I mean, other than the running, but what got you to the point, you know, between what kept you from reverting back to that right after you went home?
Yeah. What kept me from relapsing? And,
relapsing.
you know, I certainly, throughout my early adolescence and even into my adulthood, you know, I've struggled many times. You know, I've gone back to restricting and all kinds of things. So I certainly want to be very honest and upfront with that. But what was the initial kind of push to continue to gain weight? Because even when I got back from the treatment center, I was still underweight. My next oldest sister is only 14 months older than I am. And she kind of just took me under her wing. You know, we spent a lot more time together. And I just slowly but surely was able to kind of get into patterns and routines where I was, you know, eating enough calories. You know, I was working with a mental health professional that, you know, encouraged me to kind of unpack some of like, what am I afraid of? What else, you know, can I control in my life? What are my goals? And it was just a daily process. You know, it was time on task. But yeah, my sister Kristen is 14 months older than I am. And my older sisters, I mean, they've all been significantly important at different points in my life. And anybody listening to this, like, you know, if you have a friend or a family member, like that relationship can be so valuable. Like, don't give up on your person with an eating disorder. Unfortunately, sometimes I think we want to be like the food police and like, you know, try to fix it. But for me, just having people that were present, that were willing to sit with me when I needed, you know, to eat, you know, that was really helpful. And that was, and I'm a very driven person. I've always been incredibly driven. I'm motivated. I'm stubborn.
Yeah.
I think just really, really believing that there was something more. And I imagine many of your listeners are hearing this, whether you're struggling with an eating disorder or not, but maybe you're at a point in your life where you're just like, my life is okay, but I want to do something more, whether it's I want to start a business, I want to lose weight, I want to do something. Like I knew I was meant for something more. And I wanted to go for it.
That's awesome. Well, obviously you are driven. I mean, you're driven. And it was just a matter of finding the direction you needed, where you felt motivated and felt like you were on your track, you know. Obviously anyone who starts, you know, goes from where you were to distance running a couple of years later, you've got some energy, you've got something burning inside you that needs to be let out. It needs to be expressed. So that's fantastic. It's just you had to find your track, so to speak. It's amazing so what do you think how would you tie the vegetarian diet to your fractures, just to help people unpack? Is that, you know, that you started leaching protein from your bones? Was that?
Yeah, well, I think there's several things that happen, especially in young people. You know, you regardless, you have to have adequate calories, and we can certainly talk about this even with the, you know, higher like.
I think I lost your. Michelle.
Help you if you eat a cup of spinach and it has 6 milligrams of iron,
right.
Your body can only absorb 1.7% of that. That would be like me writing you a check for $1,000 and I have $17 in my bank account. Like it doesn't absorb into your body, and that's not reflected on labels, right? A lot of things in vegetable proteins like soy and you know, pea and bean protein, they're not really well utilized in the human body, and certainly those processed carbohydrates. I was eating a lot of rice and bagels and things that are just really, really poor in vitamins and protein. And then plants, a lot of plant products, you know, we're always taught like, oh, you need, you know, you can't get enough green vegetables and you can't get enough fiber and oats. Well, unfortunately, a lot of things in plants have what's called anti-nutrients, and anti-nutrients can be things like phytates, isoflavins, lectins, things that actually bind to vitamins and minerals, which can actually leach out iron and leach out calcium. So you can be eating, kale and spinach till the cows come home, but you're not going to get enough actual absorbable nutrition. And so I was getting quite a few calories. I was eating a lot of bagels and stuff, but I wasn't getting enough, enough calcium, certainly not enough fat, not enough iron. And my body just slowly started to break down. And as my body was breaking down too, I was struggling sleeping. I was irritable. I was having a lot of other symptoms of, my brain not functioning as well.
Wow. Overtraining in a large scale, basically undernourished, overtraining. Wow. Absolutely. Yeah. So because that's a stressful sport, obviously. Recovery is important.
Yeah. Distance running, it certainly can be. And, after college and I wasn't running anymore, I decided okay, well, I want to finish out my degree as a dietitian because I knew nutrition was important. It was powerful. But I wasn't quite sure which direction I wanted to go with it. So, I ended up becoming a dietitian. And during that time, I was just kind of eating the standard American diet, eating a lot of rice and vegetables, but I was also eating protein, eating some animal protein. And I just was told, hey, you're going to have lifelong anxiety. You're going to always have those, being worried about food and obsessed about food because that's what, you have a history of an eating disorder. It's just how it is. And so I kind of had accepted that is, well, this is my new norm. This is my life. But when I went to the dietetic internship, so to become a dietitian, if you guys aren't familiar with that, you have to get your 4-year degree. I got my 4-year degree. Then you apply to an internship, go to the internship, and then sit for the RD exam. When I got into my internship, I started seeing things that didn't necessarily make sense to me. But I'm new, you're a student, right? But we would go into a room with someone with diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And we would be feeding them 75, 85, sometimes 100 grams of carbohydrates a meal, and then teaching them about insulin, covering with insulin. And so I would say, well, maybe we shouldn't feed them as many carbohydrates. And I was told, oh, no, it's fine. We just have to make sure we dose them correctly. They have, the quote unquote good carbohydrates. And in the hospital setting, the hospitals I've worked at, most diabetics can order whatever they want. And what I mean by that is if you have 90 grams of carbs available for a meal, you could get chocolate cake, a caramel macchiato, and chips for your carbs.
Wow.
It's pretty terrible. And then we would talk to people with kidney failure or heart disease as a really interesting one. Heart disease patients are often put on a low fat, low salt diet. So somebody with a history of heart disease wouldn't be able to order beef or beef stew or beef patty, but they could order, 144 grams of carbs and sugar as long as it was low fat, low salt. And so, we know, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, that, one of the precursors of heart disease is often hyperglycemia. When your blood sugar is high, it's going to damage arteries, which that's how LDL back. And so I would ask questions. And then I got into where I was doing my ICU rotation, and we see people with tube feedings haven't changed since I was a kid, when I was 12 and put on 24-hour tube feedings at the treatment center. Number one ingredient is corn syrup solids, followed by maltodextrin, followed by soy protein isolate, followed by canola oil. Now, is that something we want to be giving patients in a car accident? I mean, and it's, are there better tube feeding formulas out there? Absolutely. Are they covered by insurance? Not a chance.
Gotcha.
So in the hospital, if you're able to pay $1,000 a bag, then you can probably get something with a little bit cleaner ingredients. But that's the standard. It's a very poor sugar-based formula. And I would bring these concerns up. So you say, hey, I don't know if I agree with this. Can you explain this to me? And I was just told, I was kind of pegged as the difficult dietetic student. Why are you asking these questions? Why, and for people who aren't familiar, the governing board of all dietitians, it used to be called the American Dietetics Association. Now it's the Academy of Nutrition. But, their number one sponsors are PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, General Mills, ConAgra. So we're getting a lot of this influence. And I have problems with that. To be a registered dietitian, you don't have to be a member of the Academy. And I've refused since, 2008, since I became a dietitian. I believe these sponsorships play a part in our guidelines. So I don't believe in that. And I don't like that.
Gotcha. So the American Dietetics Association is now the Academy of Nutrition?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. I must have missed that one. So it's, and you guys, so as a nutritional, a an organization that is certifying registered dietitians all over the country. You have corporate sponsor. They have corporate sponsors.
Yes.
Why wouldn't it just be federally funded so they have no strings attached from corporate funding? Why would you just not have a federally funded that can make decisions, maybe through academia, or, a board that is free to make decisions without corporate strings? That doesn't even make sense. That our guidelines, because they're writing our guidelines. They're a part of the RDA. I mean, would they be tied to the guidelines that were given every 5 years?
Yeah, guidelines are reviewed. I don't remember exactly how often, but yeah, the governing board, the people on the diet 5 years, and the guy are reviewed by the people on the board. And there's a long history. I have a whole chapter in my book about how the guidelines came. And it's bizarre. Like it sounds kind of like a science fiction story, because it has religion, it has corporate influence, it has, what was going on during World War II and into,
right. Sure. So Kellogg and all those guys that were experimenting with dietetics and the Seventh-day Adventist influence on that. And yes, I'm familiar. And I knew that we had the corporate influence in our government. Basically the food produced, or created or delivered to schools, prisons, hospitals, elderly care, military. That's all those corporate sponsors you mentioned. But I didn't realize that the ignorance of mine, but the Dietetics Association or the Nutritional Academy also had the same corporate sponsors. Curious. So we have the same industrial oil producers, the same processed grain producers, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup production, and the people putting out those food products, with all those basically all the processed food giants are sponsoring our nutritional guidelines and the food produced for our schools, military, hospitals.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, and you nailed it. I think when you really stop down, kind of break it down and think critically, it's like, oh my gosh, this is really potentially like corrupt. And this isn't, what we've seen the nutrition guidelines haven't changed since the 70s. And we're seeing people, there's a narrative in healthcare that it's like, well, if people would just move more and eat less, right? If people would just follow these guidelines, these nutrition guidelines, we'd be a healthier society. But statistically, we're actually eating more whole grain, and we're eating more fruits and vegetables, and we're eating actually a lot less animal fats than we have in the 70s. But what's happening? People are becoming sicker, more obese, more cases of diabetes, mental health, depression is the number one cause of disability worldwide. Deaths of despair have increased exponentially. What is deaths of despair? That includes suicide, as well as, like alcohol poisoning and opiate overdose. And what else is going on? We are eating so many carbohydrates and so many processed carbohydrates, and our bodies and brains can just not keep up. And then you have an entire, supposedly the nutrition experts that are encouraging this, saying we need more whole grains, and then the whole myth of moderation,
whatever that means, right?
That's exactly. Ask 10 different people, you look at 10 different, is it once a year, twice? And then we know that the human brain and the human body just does not regulate carbohydrates very well. And what do I mean by that? Like if you and I sat down, I can see, I'm guessing you're probably a slightly larger human than I am. If we both sat down and we're eating a steak, at some point we're going to be full. We have really good in our body that once we're eating enough protein and fat, really good negative feedback mechanisms that are going to be like, okay, cool, this is enough. That doesn't exist with carbohydrates, specifically processed carbohydrates. You obviously you can have that insulin spike and then, crash comes back down. But that's the reason that why most people listening to this, if you're honest with yourselves, you've probably eaten a whole bag of chips or a whole thing of ice cream or a couple pieces of cake. Like I certainly have. And what it is, it's not that you lack willpower or you're a moral failing. It's you've been given the wrong information about what the humans are supposed to eat.
Right. And that hunger or that drive to finish that is hormonally driven. It's a combination of the insulin, leptin blocking. We're not receiving the leptin tell us we're full. We're ghrelin continue to be stimulated. So we have all these hunger and satiety hormones that are getting basically messed up by the information we're putting in our mouth in terms of processed food. And it's the hormones,
But,
and and so it's signals inside.
yes,
It's not necessarily weakness as much as it is we're doing what our biochemistry is telling us to do in that moment from what we've triggered, I guess.
exactly. Think about like so many women, I mean, people in general, but women specifically I've talked to, they'll say like, I was really trying, I had a bowl of like Special K or like low fat cereal. So once again, you put these processed grains in your body, you're going to be hungry 30 minutes later. And then they're hungry. So something, and they'll feel guilty, or maybe it sets themselves up for a binge where, like you said, you're putting in everything you put in your body is information. When you put in protein and fat, you have those signals, you have the CCK, you have leptin, you have ghrelin, you have all these hormones working together to stabilize your energy and to keep you full and keep you satiated. Because, food should be something we put in our body, fuels us, keeps us going for whatever else is going on in our day. Where for most people, myself included, food kind of ruled my life. I mean, I felt like I had to eat every few hours. I was constantly hungry, tired, I was angry, I was frustrated. When I was eating a very high carbohydrate athlete, it really ruled my life. And it wasn't until last year when I really lost my health that I made a significant change.
So you lost your health as recently as last year?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, I've been a runner for quite a while, and throughout my 20s, I'm now 37. Last year when I was 36, I wanted to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. My fastest marathon time was 2:54, and you have to 45. And so I was putting in lots of miles, and I was eating a relatively high carbohydrate diet. And I started to go through a period where I just wasn't recovering well. Like my body was achy and sore. And I thought like, okay, well, I'm getting older. Maybe maybe I'm not doing something right. I was taking iron pills. So I contacted 2 different sports dietitians and said, can I get your feedback? And both of them said like, look, you need to eat more carbohydrates. You need to have, 400, 500 grams. So I started eating 6, 7, 8 times a day, all of this carbohydrates. And as you can imagine, I felt worse. I'd go out in the past, I'd been doing, 8, 10, 20-mile runs. I'd make it 2 or 3 miles from my house and I'd break out in a cold sweat and I'd have to walk home. I was waking up in the middle of the night with muscle spasms. I started to struggle even worse with anxiety, having panic attacks. It was really bad. It was really, really bad. And my come to Jesus moment was, I want to say early September of 2019. And I woke up at like 2 in the morning. My muscles were aching. And I got in my car, drove to 7-Eleven, got 30 pounds of ice, put it in the bathtub, filled up the water, sitting in an ice bath. And my wife comes in and is like, maybe we should do something differently. Yes, it was beyond time at that point to switch up. And so that was the moment when I cried and I was like, I think my running career is over. I don't think I can run competitively anymore.
Wow. So where did you go from that point? I mean, you knew you had to do something different. The last thing you wanted to do was give up running. So I'm guessing you started searching for, being a dietitian, you have tons of resources, but you had just been looking in the wrong place, apparently. So what shifted from that ice bath to where you are now? Because I'm looking at your shirt, I see the food pyramid. That's the best looking food pyramid I've ever seen. Yeah, with a cow, is that a sheep on top of it? And then a pig and a chicken?
Yeah, it's a cow, sheep, pig, and a chicken. Yeah.
I haven't seen that. What is that?
I got it on another one. It's a good one. Yeah. So at that moment, I was like, well, I'm never going to run again. Like, and if I'm not going to run, then, the next day I said, well, why don't I follow a ketogenic? Why don't I not eat carbohydrates? Because I was intuitively aware they didn't make me feel good, but I was sure that like, if I'm going to run competitively, I have to have a high carb diet.
Okay. So that's the conflict right there.
Yeah.
Between what you knew you needed and what you thought you needed for running.
Exactly. And what I had been taught as a dietitian, I have to have this to function. I have to have some carbohydrates. And so I started researching a ketogenic diet. Like, is this feasible? And there's so much fear mongering around this way of eating, right? Like not everyone, but many dietitians believe that, fat will make your heart explode and meat can cause cancer and, heart disease.
Right.
And so, the more research I did, and I got on Instagram and I looked at different stories and I went and looked at what the clinical trials were saying. And I was blown away by how many clinical trials we have that a low carbohydrate diet reversed diabetes in less than 2 weeks. mean, people are getting off 150 units of insulin in 8 days. And I had seen people in the hospital have limbs amputated from 20 years of diabetes. And, you know, and then I came across this crazy guy named Sean Baker who followed an all meat diet. And I was like, all right, I'm behind meat, but all meat, that's too much. But the more I researched, and this is what I would encourage anybody listening, like, man, critical think. I think nowadays we're just so used to, like, we see it on Instagram or Facebook and it's fact, you know, but I was curious. I was open because what I was doing was sure as heck not working. So I was like, I'm going to go into this mine. And I found several people on, you know, Instagram, you know, Carnivore Yogi, Sarah, Eve Fox, the Black Carnivore. And I just started asking them questions, like, help me understand this. And they, you know, pointed me towards some good resources. And so I decided, you know what if I just followed an all meat diet for, let's call it 30 days. I think at first I said 3 weeks. And also I really like the concept of gut healing. Like, what if I'm pulling out all those potential anti-nutrients? And of course, you know, at that time, my wife, having known me and known my history of an eating disorder, was like, no, you cannot.
Right. Sounds like another extreme.
Yes.
Yes.
Sounds extreme and restrictive. And, you know, and so she said, no. And we argued about it. And finally she said, look, you're an adult, do what you want. This won't work. And that's the Reader's Dietitian. There was some back and forth.
I'm married. I get it.
Totally, right? God bless our partner. So she's wonderful. And so, but 3 weeks after following this way of eating, I noticed right away, you know, things were changing. Like, I felt much more calm. I wasn't hungry, so I could go through my day at work. I kind of looked forward to work, and my muscles weren't hurting, but I kind of attributed that to, well, I'm not running. So of course, right? But towards the end of the 3rd week, my wife was like, hey, can you come sit with me? And I sat down with her, and she was like, I don't know if I like this way of eating yet, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. And that was pretty profound for me. And at that point, you know, my wife also appreciates reading and solitude, and I wasn't running. So I was around more and I had more energy. And so she just kind of jokingly said, well, maybe you should go for a run. And I kind of freaked out because I had given up the idea of being a runner. It was such a big part of my life and identity. But I was like, you know what? For fun. Who cares? Why don't I go jog a mile or a couple miles? Because once again, I wasn't eating any carbohydrates, so I can't go run forever. And I went out the door and I came back an hour later. And at that point, I knew there was something to this. Like,
an hour later. Oh, wow.
I'm fueled by fat and protein. And, you know, I went through a period where I was really angry because I was like, everything I've been taught is hurting people and is potentially corporate sponsored and is not moving with the data. And that's when I decided to start, you know, writing my book. And, you know, the first draft was pretty angry. It's kind of gone back and, you know, changed a bit. But, yeah, from there, you know, I have a coach now. I have a distance running coach. I decided that, you know, if I can run again, let's go for it. I decided I wanted to run ultra marathons, which is any distance longer than, you know, the marathon 26 miles. Mm-hmm. And I decided that I was just going to take this, you know, low carbohydrate diet. And I'm not, you know, anti-carbohydrate. I certainly utilize some carbohydrates for my running. But they're a small portion of my diet. You know, I think it's a tragedy that, you know, we feed our diabetics and our psychiatric patients 350 grams of carbohydrates and, you know, up to 38 teaspoons of sugar a day. And I'm, you know, as a distance runner running 80 miles a week, you know, having 50 grams of carbs or less a day, you know, there's a big disconnect of what's going on and what we should be feeding people.
Right. I just see that you're protein centric. So even if you're protein centric, you're going to have a high amount of fat. So at 50 or 80, let's say 50 grams of carbs a day. And how many calories are you saying? You do look, we talk about the size here. You look like a smaller human. And you're running all the time. So you're very thin. Obviously you don't carry any extra weight. Are you eating to keep up with your running now? That's 80 miles a week. Are you eating upwards of 3,000 calories a day, or are you?
Yeah. Somebody asked me that the other day. So I had to go back and look because that's one of the beautiful things that when I transitioned to this way of eating, I actually stopped measuring.
You don't have to count.
Distance. And I had to be careful though, because when you eat a lot of fat and protein, you're very satiated. So it was kind of easy to undereat to meet my energy needs. I'm 7, but yeah, I'm relatively lean. So somebody asked, like, how much are you eating? So I was like, so I had to go like download an app. But yeah, in my really high, when I'm running about 70 to 80 miles a week, it gets close to about 32 to 300 calories. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's calories. And then fat, I mean, up to 200 plus grams of fat. So there's quite a bit of fat. But I can get, anywhere between 150 and 200 grams of protein as well, sometimes more. And then, yeah, my carbohydrate intake went up higher when I got, that high mileage. When we were like 50 and 60 miles a week, I was able to do really well between like 50 and 75. And then as we got to those final stages, when I had runs where I would do 28-mile run one day and the next day come back and do like 15 or 16 fast, like I felt a little better having some more carbohydrates. So yeah, I mean, but most of I have a video on my YouTube channel, what I eat in a day. It's not very exciting. It's a lot of beef and butter and, a little bit of long fermented sourdough. And yeah, my goal has been to really get the message out to people that if we can go back to human physiology, how are humans designed to eat, meat and fat, like start there and kind of build out. Right. I think we could restore the health of our nation, but I don't think we're going to see this in healthcare. I don't think we're going to see this advocated by big corporations, but I do think it's going to be a grassroots movement. So I'm so thankful for, podcasts like yours.
Oh, well, I'm thankful for dietitians who have, eye-opening experiences and are willing to relearn what they were, taught, or unlearn what they were taught in school, and are have an open mind because you're looking at what doesn't make sense. Like you said, you got into practice and it didn't make sense. It just didn't make sense from a student. I mean, just coming in as a student, you were there as an intern and it didn't make sense. It's like common sense, where the more sugar we give them, more insulin we have to give them. This is what's killing them. This is progressing the disease. Why are we progressing the disease with the diet and medications when you could potentially reverse it or end it? And I think
that's probably what's the most difficult thing in the healthcare setting is when I like kind of point this out and bring this up, especially to newer dietitians, like they agree and they get it. Like, yeah, I think so. But, I had a dietitian I worked with in the last hospital that said, well, what are you going to do? You're not going to change the world, Michelle. Like, this is the way it is. Like, and it works, I've said before that like the only way healthcare continues to function, at least how it's currently set up, is I have to keep you sick. I can't heal you, because if I heal you, then you're no longer a customer. You no longer need my services. If I kill you, then you're no longer a customer. But if I keep you perpetually ill, if I keep you on insulin, if I keep you coming back, if I keep you in kidney failure, if I keep you having infections, so much of which is tied to hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, then, I keep a lot of money in a system. So,
and that's shocking to say that to someone who's in the system. They would be appalled that many of them, if they would be appalled that you were implying that their job is to keep people sick. Yet it's the system that is set up to run that way. They are just doing their part. They're a cog in the wheel, but the system is set up to keep people sick. It's not the people. It's not that doctors want to keep people sick or nurses want to keep people sick, but it's the system itself is set up that way. And as you said, as you were told, what are you going to do? Change the world? This is how it works. This is how we all get paid. This is how the system functions.
Well, and yeah, I definitely want to reinforce what you said, that I do believe 100% that 99 to, even 100%, every medical professional I've ever met genuinely wants to help people. Absolutely. Like they're not in like, I want to hurt people just so I can make money. That never happened. Everybody believes what they're doing. Everybody cares. But then you get in a system and you're kind of stuck because they will limit what you can do and say and teach. Mm-hmm. And then here you are. You're a professional. You have student loans, you have your family to support. Like, what exactly are you supposed to do? And that's my book, The Dietitian's Dilemma. Like, what do I do when my health was restored, yet I know this information is potentially hurting people?
Mm-hmm. That's a great book. I can't wait to read it. That is, as a trainer. So I've been a trainer for 22 years, awesome. And realized the benefit of low carb probably 18 years ago, that it's just kind of through personal experience. It's just, this is, and then some fasting. Started working in fasting about 10 years ago and helping. And I had pushback from people I worked with, from trainers who said, you need carbs. You need carbs to survive. Like, no, we're not working with 20-year-old college athletes who have who are, you know, just go and can, you know, they can survive a fall off a building drunk and just take a nap and they get up and they're ready for pizza. I mean, it's like, we're talking about 40, 50, 60-year-old people who are struggling already with insulin resistance and weight. They don't need carbohydrates. They need to tap into what they've already got stored. They don't need more energy food, right? They got to tap. And the only way to tap into their own energy storage is to bring those insulin levels down, is to stop feeding themselves energy food so they can actually access what they've got, what they're carrying around with them. And back then it didn't connect. Now it's much more accepted. It's much more, there's, because of like what you're talking about with the podcast and people like you writing a book, and Sean Baker, who's an MD, who's putting it out there, putting his reputation on the line, saying, I only eat meat, and carnivore MD, Paul Saladino, you know, those kind of guys who are saying, not only is meat not bad for you, but it's one of the best things you can possibly put in your body because of all the micronutrients that are in there, in addition to the proteins and the fats that our brain needs, that our system needs. And so it, as you said, it's grassroots. We cannot change the healthcare system. It's grassroots. It's us communicating and creating communities and talking to each other and not treating each other like competition, but like part of a community that is trying to elevate a conversation and elevate a different way to approach sickness, you know?
Yeah. And I think right now, you know, especially in this current time we're living in, you know, in 2020, people desperately need hope. We need hope. Yeah. We need news. We need inspiration. We need to believe, you know. I think this year, there's nobody that I know that hasn't been affected in some way by everything that's happened this last year. And so it's my goal and it's my hope that we can advocate this message that, like, yeah, you know, if your health is struggling, which, you know, we know a large portion of our population is having issues with their health, you know, even though, like, if you looked at me last year, you might've been like, oh, wow, she's super healthy. She's still lean, but I was an emotional mess. You know, I was having a lot of anxiety and a lot of other problems and a lot of issues. Mm. And I love what you said about meat. You know, meat is truly the superfood. We have to get back to really looking, once again, every species has a species specific diet. You know, our bodies are able to utilize all those nutrients in meat. And it's not just protein. It's carnitine, it's creatine, it's carnosine, you know, it's zinc, it's B12. It's all those different things that your body is able to process and utilize perfectly and synergistically. So when you have a lot of other, you know, certainly carbohydrates and plants food, your body is not able to utilize that nutrition nearly as well. So I'm a huge advocate for that. And I also think it's really important as we move forward, we have conversations, because one of the big, you know, reasons people say, well, you know, after you get past the meat, you know, it doesn't cause heart disease and meat doesn't cause cancer, other these issues, people will say, well, it's bad for the environment. And I just can't get behind that. But if we look at regenerative farming, you know, we have a regenerative farmer about, you know, 75 to 90 minutes away, we get our meat from. Meat, animals are necessary for our planet, you know, animal manure. It's a process, it's a cycle, it's a life cycle. It actually puts carbon back in the soil, but you do have to do it. There's not a human alive that thinks that massive factory farming or abusing animals is a good idea, right? But when you get back to, they call it like radically traditional farming, so where animals are able to move to different lots and they can roam freely, it's a really important thing for the planet.
Absolutely. I think Sacred Cow, which is just came out. Diana Rogers, she's going to be a guest on the podcast coming up soon too. But that movie coming out, they got the movie, I think inside peek of it coming up late November, I think the last week in November. And it's exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, not only is it good for us, but it's also not bad for the planet. And that there's a great way to do this. There's a system in place that was in place 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and we've screwed it up. And the animals are part of keeping our soil vital and full of nutrients for our food, for our plant food, but also for keeping that soil bound together, for keeping carbon in the soil, as you mentioned, and keeping it's an existing life cycle. And we have separated it to the point that both are suffering. Both the animals are suffering and the soil is suffering, because we've separated them and put them in different camps instead of how they started off, which is, like you said, the cows are eating the leftover from the plants, and then the manure is putting nitrogen back in. And it's this wonderful cycle of the sun and the plants and the animals. and we've jacked it up and somehow blamed the cows. We're blaming the cows. Like, what did the cows do exactly to mess up this system?
Yeah, you know, we're looking at the wrong things, and that's something that I hope to direct more attention to. You know, like you said, or we said earlier in this podcast, even like meat has been demonized. Like, oh, if you eat a cheeseburger, that's bad. It's like, actually, if you just get rid of the processed bun, that's really good for you. You know,
Right.
we're pointing fingers at the wrong things, and we're putting people in the hospital on these ridiculously restrictive diets. Like, humans cannot survive or thrive in most circumstances, especially if you're metabolically compromised, on a really low fat, low protein diet. It doesn't taste good. You know, I can tell you years of stories of patients and family members sneaking in food just because they're hungry, you know, of these really, really low fat diets. And so I'm hopeful that we can get back to, you know, almost like common sense nutrition, you know, fueling our bodies with meat and fat. And then certainly, like I said earlier, like if you are metabolically healthy and you can tolerate, you know, some carbohydrates, some vegetables, whatever, that's fine. I'm not anti-carbohydrate, but most of the people we certainly see in the hospital, it's not like, in the hospital, we're not seeing like, oh, this person's a little overweight. Like, we're seeing wounds down to the bone. We're seeing amputations. We're seeing kidney failure. We're seeing massive infection, full body systemic, you know, sepsis. And not in like, oh, my 90-year-old grandparent. I mean, I've seen heart disease in people who are younger than I am, and 35. I had a stroke in a guy who was 38. You know, we're seeing people who are so obese but malnourished they can't even get up and walk to the toilet. I mean, you guys, this is not good. And
it's an epidemic. Yeah.
But the good news is too, is a lot of it is reversible and changeable, moldable. The human body has a tremendous capacity to heal. I mean, how fantastic, you know, that someone like me, I was 12 and I was dying. You put the right nutrients, you can survive. And then you put the really correct right nutrients and I can thrive. You know, the human body has a tremendous capacity to heal when we provide it with the right nutrients. So that I find to be encouraging, that I find to be hopeful. And, you know, people who are like, well, I'm too far gone, I'm too sick, I'm too old, I'm too fat, I'm too this, like, my message to you would be, you know, you're not. Nobody is too far gone. Everybody can benefit by shifting how they eat, and certainly also shifting how they think. I mean, obviously the mindset plays a role as well.
Right. Absolutely. Do you mind just helping connect the dots between, and because I'm sure you've dug into this and you continue to experience it, but your anxiety and your diet, because you've mentioned that several times, and I don't know that everybody realizes. I've heard that from several people who switched to more either a keto or even gone to carnivore diet. Not only did they have physical changes, physical improvements in gut health, in metabolic health, in their activity, in their weight, but they slept better and had less anxiety. And I don't think everyone connects that feeling or that struggle with their diet. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think there's two things going on when it comes to, you know, mental health and nutrition. And this Georgia Ede and Chris Palmer, both psychiatrists, have done just excellent work. I'd encourage anyone who's interested to look into their research. But what we know, because I was curious, I was like, why is my anxiety so much better? And just kind of common sense might say like, well, I'm not eating as much processed foods. I'm not riding that blood sugar roller coaster. But it's actually quite a bit deeper than that. You know, what I found is what happens in the brain when you eat a lot of processed carbohydrates. Let's say you're eating a lot of like bagels or a lot of bread, a lot of sugar. And this can actually also happen with a lot of seed oils, you know, a lot of our like peanut butters, partially hydrogenated oils.
Canola, soy oil, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oil is it actually, when you take in a lot of those foods, it actually shifts the neurotransmitter glutamate, and it kind of puts like pedal to the metal for glutamate, and it gives you a dopamine response at the same time. So you eat like a lot of the high sugary, high processed foods, you get a dopamine hit. So you actually initially feel really good, but it sends the neurotransmitter glutamate like through the roof. It can be up to 1,000 times what it's supposed to be in the brain. And what that does is it actually stops your brain from being able to participate in neuroplasticity. And this is a big word, but basically what that's saying is your brain can actually process and utilize new information. And it also prevents your brain from really coping with stress. So if there's need right now in life, it's to cope with stress, right? So let's say you have a really rough day and you're stressed out and you come home and you have cookies, you know, you feel good initially because you get that dopamine hit, But glutamine is going to prevent you from coping with stress. So now you feel kind of anxious and kind of frustrated. And I see this a lot with people with eating disorders. They've done some study on addiction recovery. Is you're doing all this work, you're going all this therapy, but you're eating a lot of these processed foods, your brain can't rewire. It can't actually take that information that you're learning and you're utilizing and actually help implement it. So you're much more likely to repeat those same patterns and have that same situation and same anxiety, right? So obviously on, like you said, on a physical and nutritional level, it changes everything, but you have to set your brain up in a way that can effectively, heal and rewire. And it's very, very difficult to do that when you're having, you're spiking your neurotransmitters.
Oh yeah, that makes complete sense. Wow, that would make sense. It's your brain chemistry. Basically, affects your brain chemistry in its ability to, like you said, neuroplasticity to cope. I think fat and cholesterol also play a large role in those neurotransmitters, just as synapses connecting and so forth. And so, if you were to go the other extreme with, say, as a vegetarian, when you're getting very little animal fat and animal cholesterol, getting more plant sterols and these plant oils, I would assume that would affect the synapses connections in the brain as well, because you're constantly replacing proteins with protein and fat with fat. So we start replacing what's existing cholesterol with, or fats with plant fats, and then we start have plant sterols making it in our system. That would certainly have an effect on cognitive ability, I would think, or
the brain needs fat. The brain needs fat, and the brain needs saturated fat. We've done such a terrible job in healthcare making everybody afraid of saturated fat, but the brain needs saturated fats to function, and the brain really needs EPA and DHA to function, and those are predominantly found in the plant kingdom. I mean, you can get a little bit of those things from like chia and flax, but the problem is the conversion rate is 0 to 9%. So you can eat like all this chia and flax and get barely any. Or you can just eat like salmon, or you can eat, fatty fish, salmon roe, things like that. And you get a significantly more amount of DHA and EPA. That's why we see a lot of omega-3 deficiencies in vegans and vegetarians. And we see a lot of depression in that population. The brain wants fat, and the brain specifically wants, animal fats. At least that's what the research is showing. Also want to point out one more thing on, Chris Palmer's doing research on this. But there's a theory that people with severe depression, like not responding to any medications, severe long-lasting depression, mood disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and bipolar disorder, may actually have an error in metabolism in the brain. And I want you to think about this like epilepsy. So, let's say a baby has epilepsy. Like, it's not their fault. It's not like they had a bad diet that made them, have issues. But if that baby gets carbohydrates, they have seizures. Often those children are put on, low carbohydrate ketogenic diets, and they no longer have seizures. We know that a ketogenic diet is for many people a treatment for epilepsy.
Right.
So people that have this schizoaffective disorder, or schizophrenia, or these other mental disorders, one of the theories is that perhaps their brain can no longer utilize and metabolize carbohydrates properly. And so, there's a clinical trial that's they're funding right now to prove this. But, some of the anecdotal studies that are coming, or anecdotal reports that are coming out of this, they're just amazing. So even more proof, maybe some people just cannot metabolize them at all.
Wow. That's scary, considering that's what the recommendation is worldwide. WHO, from Harvard, we're seeing, pushing the plant-based narrative, meatless Mondays, meatless cafeterias at school, where they're making it, almost illegal. And we have growing children with developing brains, who basically are at the mercy of their authority at school, and the mercy of, and sometimes maybe not great, living conditions at home either. Maybe their family isn't, wealthy enough to supplement enough to make up for a meatless or an animal, a plant-based diet, essentially, which would need a lot more supplementation for the nutrients that you're missing. And it seems to be very, if you think about who can actually afford, if you could supplement adequately, it would take a lot. And you're basically looking at a fairly upper middle class, wealthy person who can afford to get what they would need without meat, I would think. You're kind of...
I have very strong opinions on
okay.
diet. And I've mostly seen that in our senior population, you know, having worked in the hospital, is that there is a narrative right now that we need more plants and we need less meat and we need more tofu and we need more quinoa, we need more soy-based things. And what happens, you know, when we share this message with our senior population is they're not, you know, okay, I'm going to eat less meat and I'm going to eat more salad. They just replace their meat with carbohydrates. Okay, well, instead of having some turkey, I'm going to have another cookie or a roll, or grandma's going to have, you know, they're more sugar and more processed carbohydrates. And certainly for our kids now, you know, when I had Dr. Robert Siwis on my YouTube, the fastest growing obese population right now is ages 2 to 5. And so our children are now more and more processed foods and more processed carbohydrates. Our kids more than ever need this animal protein. You know, I was shocked that 25% of the world is anemic, 25%. And that percentage is higher for our preschool and, you know, 5 and under kids. And it's like, well, this is the population that should be eating liver and burger patties, but what are we feeding them? It's like, here's your goldfish crackers and here's your fruit snacks. You know, we're feeding our children poorly. And for kids saying like, okay, well, instead of a hamburger, we're going to give you a soy burger. So I've taken away the little bit of actual protein and iron and put, you know, estrogen and isoflavones. Like this, I think this, well, I'm not going to say I think, I believe the research shows this is a very, very bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so let's give our listeners some action steps from you. I know you said you have a protein centric diet. So if you're just coming somebody who's trying to, like, say, lose, let's say not necessarily full-blown diabetic, but just they've got some insulin resistance. Maybe they want to lose 20, 30 pounds, you know, middle-aged person, somewhere between, you know, 35 and 60, you know, let's say right in that range where they're like, hey, I want to be somewhat active, but they're not a killer athlete or anything like that. Just your average person who works 40, 50 hours a week and moderately active, but they want to have a balance. They want to have a good diet, you know, without, what can they do without fear? You know, because there's so much misinformation. They're told to go one way, then there's something coming at them saying that's going to cause X disease. And so how do you approach that? Like, what are your protein recommendations, or what does a meal look like? How do you do that? You say you probably don't count a lot of calories now. You look at a plate.
Certainly, first of all, if you are, you know, you're diabetic, you have hypertension, you have something, you really need to work with a doctor. If you're on a medication, specifically if you're on insulin or if you're on long acting or whatever insulin, you have to work with somebody to help get you off of that. Because if you dramatically reduce your carbohydrates and you're taking like exogenous insulin, I mean, you don't want to have like a blood sugar crash, right? So I always recommend that if you are, there's so many good, thank goodness, low carbohydrate doctors and low carbohydrate health professionals that can help you with that nowadays. Yes. But I don't think it's not a good idea to be taking an insulin and changing your diet. But if, like, let's just say you're overweight or you're pre-diabetic and you're not on any medication yet, you know, what you really want to do is you just really want to realize that, you know, insulin shuts down your body's ability to burn fat for fuel. And your goal is to burn fat for fuel. You got a lot of it if you're overweight. So eat foods that minimize the insulin response, things that you enjoy, you know, things that you like. I often, you know, I have people that tell me they eat twice a day. I eat 3 times a day. I think you need to figure out what works for you. But having a portion of protein, something you enjoy, in fats, it's so hard to get beyond that fear because we've been told like, oh, you need, you know, a teaspoon of fat or a teaspoon. You know, my day starts out with about 3/4 to a full pound of full fat ground beef and a few tablespoons of butter. And most people would say like, oh my gosh, like that's so much protein and fat. You know, if you're not into beef or that sounds kind of intimidating in the morning, you can have eggs, you can have cheese, you can have bacon, you can have all these foods, you know, that are high in protein and high in fat, but really restrictive in carbohydrates. And you basically repeat that process, you know, 2 to 3 times a day. It's not overcomplicated. And of course, you know, if you're coming from a really high carbohydrate diet, when you initially switch, you've got to be very careful to make sure you take in electrolytes. I would highly recommend looking into some type of electrolyte replacement, because what's happening is your body, it's a good thing long-term, but your body is just like not used to not having to produce insulin. So you're going to be secreting a lot of sodium. So you need to be making sure you're replacing that. And there's so many good now, ketogenic health coaches, carnivore coaches that can like walk you through that process. But that for me, it really comes back to, you know, so many people, carbohydrate is the center of their world, their diet. Make protein make that beef. And not, this isn't a time to be like having 9 boneless, skinless chicken breast, right? Like, and that's fine if you like chicken, but you want to have fat. Fat is important, you know. It's amazing how much you'll enjoy that. I love lamb. Lamb is super fatty, you know, and so just,
I'm with you. Yeah, I love it.
Often in the morning, I'll have a pound of lamb. You know, don't scrape off the fat. Put that on. Put salt on, and I think you'll be surprised by how satiated you feel. Like I was amazed. I could go, you know, 6 hours without even thinking about food.
For sure.
And certainly, I mean, for many people, food is also a coping mechanism, is also an emotional management skill. So that's something, you know, I highly recommend addressing too. If you've been using a food as a way to cope, and all of a sudden you're no longer having those carbohydrates or those sweet things, you're going to have to find other things, you know, to fill that void. And there's a lot of good health professionals that can help you with that. But yeah, how I kind of started was, you know, I set a goal, like, what do I want to do? At that time, it was just, I don't want to be hurting, don't want to have muscle pain. And then I said, let's try it. Don't be afraid to fail too. People always like, what exactly should I eat? Just like, you know, try it, go for it. Try beef. Doesn't work. Try. My wife eats almost a pound of bacon a day. It's so funny when you go to the grocery store. Like, oh, you're stocking up for the month. Like, nope, this is for tomorrow. You know, like
I know. We're the same way with eggs. We're the same way. We'll go through. Our family go through a dozen eggs a day easily.
They don't. We used to. They're getting old. We get like 2 or 3 eggs a week now. We used to get a lot more. But but yeah, and I found it very satisfying. It's very fulfilling to eat high fat, high protein. I think you'd be surprised. And you know, for some people, my wife is super creative. She likes, you know, spices and all this stuff. I'm perfectly happy with ground beef and salt. So you know, kind of figure out like where you are, what works for you, and then you know, get kind of excited about it. I was like, I was hopeful, you know, and I'm here to tell you. And there's thousands and thousands of people online, clinical trials, data, anecdotal stories that this works. And this has a great compliance and sustainability rate because the food tastes great, you're not hungry, and it's meeting all your nutritional needs.
Yeah. So do you get into like a protein requirement per pound of body weight, that kind of thing with people? You kind of just say, fill your plate with meat and eat to satiety. Is that kind of how you're?
I wouldn't worry too much. I mean, with the rare exception, if you have like severe end-stage kidney failure, which, you know, if that's obviously a different story, but for most people, they even have studies. I mean, Diana cites a great study in her book that people that actually ate they ate more calories than they needed for their day, but it was in protein. They didn't gain any weight. So your body actually does a really good job of, you know, excreting nitrogen. And so, yeah, I don't really worry about the specific amount. You know, I know somebody asked me how much I eat per pound of, you know, I certainly exceed 1 pound, 1 gram per pound, you know, but I think for most people, 2 grams per kilogram, you can go that or above, as long as you don't have like end-stage renal failure, you should be totally fine. And I think you kind of
2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Is that what you're saying? 2 grams of protein per
kilogram of body weight. Yeah. I think I do about 2.5. But you know, I run a lot. So
yeah, that's impressive. That's impressive. It's hard to eat. It's even for me, it's hard to eat that much.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done it, and I'm not saying, I'm not complaining. I'm not, no, it's a complaint, but it's like, it's deliberate. Like, I don't want anything else once I've done that. Like you said, you're very satisfied. But what I found is a lot of women tend to be almost scared of protein or eating that much meat. They think it's going to bulk them or make them gain weight. And they're barely eating the minimum. When I'm talking to them, I'm thinking, you're barely eating a minimum amount to keep you, no longer you're snacking and hungry all the time. You're barely eating enough to maintain the healthy tissue that you have. I mean, what would be a good, let's back this up to like starter version. Someone is really been, you know, they've been on the scared of meat train for a while, and it's even a female, okay, who's maybe not super active, not a runner like you. What would be a good minimum to shoot for?
Well, I mean, if you're super scared too, I think it just depends. Like, what are you ready to like take that step? Because I've had people tell me like, I don't know if I can do more than an ounce or two. Okay, that's great. I mean, you need to start where you're at, and maybe other foods. Like, are you scared of beef, but you can do fish or eggs? Like, great. But if we're just saying like, someone says, hey, I'm ready to go, I'm going to face this fear, I think 1 pound is kind of a minimum. You know, I've talked to several women, especially if you're coming from like a history of veganism or under eating. I mean, you might need 3 pounds a day, you know, but at least
3 pounds of meat.
Yeah. I know.
Or a protein, kind of.
Yeah, and just just for a set period of time. You know, when I first started eating this way, I was almost scared at how much I was eating. I mean, I had days where I'd eat a pound of meat 3 times a day. I'm like, God, this seems like so much meat. But over time, your body kind of levels out, right? Your body kind of says, okay, this is good. I'm healing. I feel good. But I'd say a minimum of 1 pound, you know, and you can divide that into 2 or 3 or whatever works for you. And you don't just want to eat, you know, often you eat meat, you'll add butter, you add coconut oil, you have whatever other fats you want to add to it. I also am a huge advocate of liver. I know most people don't like how liver tastes, but I think it's just it's such a dense source of iron and, you know, zinc and vitamin A and all the other good stuff that I think having some organ meats, especially in the beginning stages, can be really helpful and healing. So I think that's a good thing to consider, having, you know, a couple ounces a week at least.
I try to fit it in like a vitamin. I treat liver like a vitamin. Well, I'll cook some of it maybe in the crock pot, or, you know, slow cook it, maybe season it with some garlic, whatever, you know, make it somewhat more palatable. But I have it in the fridge, and to me, it's like 2 or 3 ounces a day is like vitamin A. You got some B vitamins. It's so nutrient dense. I treat it like a vitamin.
Yep.
You know, it's not like is this my gourmet meal? No, this is what I need for survival, for to getting what I need from it. You know, so about a pound of meat is probably about 100, give or take, about 100 grams of protein, depending on the meat, right?
Sure.
Get in that ballpark. Would you say probably? I mean, whether it's chicken or beef or fish, whatever, you're in the ballpark of about 100 grams a day for most people. Yeah, that's a good, like you said, that's a good goal to shoot for, like a good starting point, you said.
It's a good starting point. I mean, a lot of people might need more than that, just because like our health is so poor, you know, our nutrition status is so poor.
Yeah, not a limit, not a ceiling, but a like a floor, like a minimum.
Because, you know, the recommendations are 0.08, like ridiculously low, like our current RDA recommendations, and those are, I think, terrible, you know. So I would encourage people not to be afraid to have, you know, to have more. A lot of women I talk to will do like 2 meals of 10 ounces or 2 meals of 12 ounces of protein, you know, so that's 24. So that's, you know, almost, if a pound is 16. So that's about 1.5 pounds, maybe a little bit more a day. And then they'll have like bone marrow, they'll have, you know, extra fat, they'll have like egg yolks and things like that too, just to supplement. Because if you're not getting your calories from carbohydrates, you do want to make sure you're getting enough calories. I see this in women sometimes. They get really excited and they'll just, okay, I'm just going to eat a pound of meat, but that may not be enough calories. You know, you need fat, and you need fat for your hormones. So we use a lot of tallow. We cook everything in extra fat. We add butter. We go through at least a stick of butter every other day in my house, and there's just 2 of us. Yeah.
Cooking with lard. So you're cooking with like lard and tallow and bacon fat and stuff like that.
Yep.
Okay.
Tallow, fat, ghee sometimes.
Yeah, we have that too. Yeah. Awesome, man. That's so good to meet a registered dietitian who's there, you know, and I know they're out there, but it's like every time I meet one, or I meet a doctor who's there, like where you are right now, it's a joy to like see, you know, it's like, it's getting out there. This really is a grassroots movement. And it really is you start with an N of 1, like experiment of 1, right? Starts right here. Right. And sometimes you had to go through what you went through to realize what was missing, to realize where you were missing, what was missing, what you were taught, and how to help other people. You had to go through your journey.
Yeah, I wouldn't trade it for anything. You know, when I lost my running, and it seemed like everything was spiraling, but you know, that often like the worst things that happen to us are kind of like springboards to like better things. My life is so much better. I don't have anxiety. I love what I'm doing. You know, I'm writing this book. I'm able to come on podcasts like this and advocate. And, you know, I ran my first ultra marathon last week, and I won. You know, once again, I couldn't run 2 miles, and it was a 6-hour race. I covered 44.6 miles.
Wow.
And it was incredible. Like,
congratulations.
Thank you very much. It was a really cool day. I cried. But yeah, I'm grateful. And I'm just, like I said, I'm always happy to come and talk about this.
Did I see you at the top time as a female?
Yeah. Exciting. I had the top 6-hour race time for 2020. And at first I was like, well, so much has been canceled. Is that much big of a deal? But then I went back and looked that it would have been the top distance covered for 2017, 2018. It would have been the second for 2019. A world record was set in 2019. So it would have been for 2019. But I was really excited that I covered the most distance. Yeah, I was,
That's awesome.
it was a really good day, you know, when you train your body well, you know, eating tons of meat and tons of fat. And it was just a great testimony, because I've had so many people be like, oh, this diet's going to kill you. And it's like, well, I think I'm doing okay.
Yeah. Not only is it, can you do an ultra this way, but you're optimal.
Yeah, I believe
It's
so.
not, it's not like, can you make this work as an endurance athlete? But it's not, but it may not be ideal, but you can make it work. No, you actually had the top time. You've made it optimal as a carnivore. That's a lot more than just saying you can do it. You can be an endurance athlete as a carnivore. You hit the top time in a 3 out of 4 years, and number 2 on the 4th, right behind the world record. That's a tremendous story. That's a tremendous. It's like, not only can you do it, you can be the best. And so I think that's a paradigm shift for athletics. That's what
we're going for. We're going for in the paradigm.
Yeah, that's a complete paradigm shift for athletics. That's like, no one would ever tell you that you say, especially let's say 3, 4, 5 years ago, they wouldn't have never thought that you could perform on that level, unless you're like Finney and, you know, those, you know, who wrote that. I forgot what it was called, but it was there's a couple PhDs who everybody thought was crazy, and wrote a book about 7 or 8 years ago on keto, and they're endurance athletes. So I think they're cyclists, maybe they're ultra runners, and they about low carb endurance, and people call them nuts in their own field. Other these are PhDs, and they call them nuts. And yet here you are proving it again. It's like, you're optimal. You're not just competing. You're optimal as a carnivore in an endurance sport. That's exciting. That's exciting.
Excited, you know, Zach Bitter, who is, you know, my coach, he's a low carb athlete as well, and he has the current world record for 100 miles. And so we just picked our next race, so we're excited to. I'm
That's
excited.
Awesome. That's awesome. What a great! Thank you so much for coming on. I want to be respectful of your time. I keep asking you questions and taking you here, but how can people find you? Let's have your handles. What are all your? Where's your social media?
Instagram is where I'm most active. I should have a website pretty soon for the book specifically, but right now you can find me, all one word, at Run Eat Meat Repeat on Instagram. And you can find me on Twitter, Michelle Hurn, HURNRD. And yeah, hopefully the book's going to be called The Dietitian's Dilemma. That should be out hopefully very early winter 2021. And there should be a website on that pretty soon.
Okay. You probably do Amazon on that? People want to look for it there?
Will be Amazon for sure.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate it. I'll get all those in the show notes so people can find you. Thank you again. I love this story. I mean, I just, it's like from struggle to number one. You know, that's amazing. That's a great story. You got the hero story here. So awesome. Well, I look forward to having you back after the book's out, and we can
yeah, I'd love to
unpack that some more. Awesome. Thanks again, and have a great week.